Slider told Maverick in the movie Top Gun, "Remember boys, no points for second place." This must have lit a fire under Sega developer Yu Suzuki's ass, as he then set about creating a game that was heavily influenced by the same movie. Just to prove that you do earn points for second place, you see, in fact, second place here has 6,500,000 points. So you were wrong, Slider. In 1986, and obviously after watching the movie Top Gun, Sega game developer Yu Suzuki got to work on a game that sees the player take flight with an American F-14 Tomcat fighter jet and blast every other flying object out of the sky. And this game was given the name Afterburner. Afterburner utilised the same sprite scaler technology that had been pioneered in previous Sega games such as Space Harrier and Outrun, but to give the player an even more impressive sense of speed, the technology was updated to support 60 frames per second, and so the third incarnation of Sega's sprite scaler technology was born. As if that wasn't impressive enough, Yu Suzuki wanted the player to feel immersed in the gameplay and insisted that a hydraulic motion simulator arcade cabinet be used in certain regions. And this cabinet would simulate an aircraft's cockpit, complete with flight stick controls, a chair with a seatbelt, and hydraulic motion technology that moves, tilts, rolls and rotates the cockpit in sync with the on-screen action. I never seen one of these cabinets in use anywhere when I was a lad. In fact, the very first time I had seen one was in the Terminator 2 movie. The only version of Afterburner I had been able to play in the arcades was the regular upright arcade cabinet, like this. Cabinets aside, Yu Suzuki had a vision of a game where the player would feel more involved, where it felt they were in control, instead of merely controlling a character in a game. Whether or not he achieved this is not a question I can answer, having never played the full cabinet, but what I do know for sure is that the game was very profitable for Sega, and in 1987 it was Japan's third highest grossing arcade game, behind R-Type, which was no surprise really, and another Sega hit, Outrun. The enemy! Let's have a look at the visuals, and you would have to agree that they are mighty impressive, especially for 1987. Everything moves along at this rapid, smooth pace, with objects on the ground scaling in very nicely, and the trails of smoke left behind by the missiles that fade out quick, all contributing to the massive sense of speed. The barrel roll manoeuvre looks great too, with the whole screen rotating around the fighter jet to make it look like the pilot is rotating the plane. The backgrounds are a little bland, but what do you expect from a game that spends most of its time in the air? The enemy aircraft look great as well, although it is hard to see any real detail on them as they come in so quick and then get blown out of the sky. And when you get blown out of the sky, you see this trail of fireballs along the ground, or these big huge fireballs in the sky. The sound is really good in this game. The explosions sound outstanding, and you will hear them a lot. And the sampled speech constantly reminding you to fire almost encourages you along with a sense of urgency. The music is awesome in this game, and the bass is really thumping. The real sense of atmosphere you get when you play this game is unlike most other games of the time, or even today. It sounds like something is constantly going on and helps with the immersion of the play. The music and sound effects are all suitably loud, and they need to be, as I now move on to the gameplay. Fighter pilots need to be wary of this sensation called G-lock when they bank at high speed. G-lock, or loss of consciousness through gravity, is a real danger to any fighter pilot, but when you play Afterburner you can suffer from a phenomenon called B-lock. That's loss of consciousness through boredom. You see, Afterburner is a classic example of a good looking and good sounding game being used to hide some rather tedious and dull gameplay, which is why it's a good thing the music and sound is loud, as it needs to be to keep the player awake. When this cabinet would be in an arcade, the sound would drown out almost every other game in the place, and it would draw you in like a siren song. And then you would look at the hyper fast visuals and think, this game might be alright. Look, it's even got a flight stick, just like a real fighter jet probably has. But once you insert your 50p for a go, you would quickly discover this game is really dull and boring to play. First off, the thing that attracts you in, the hyper fast visuals, the manic amount of sprites and explosions and stuff, all that does is make it harder to actually see what is going on in the game. And so a lot of gamers would progress far into the game by pure blind luck, as opposed to skill. Still, it didn't stop me from having a go on it to see what it was really like. And when the license was snapped up by Activision to produce it for the Commodore 64, my curiosity got the better of me, and I had to have a go. Oh my god. What the heck is this? First off, I have to say that the Commodore 64 version of Afterburner has a reputation of being one of the very worst games ever on that machine. And it's even harder to dispute that fact here. What Commodore 64 owners got for their £10 was this tragic offering. I mean, just look at it. It's like something threw up on your screen and you're just trying to avoid the chunky bits of puke. Awful controls, and just one soundtrack for the whole game meant your senses were going to take a battering. And then, without warning, this happens. The tape just starts to load in the next level, which is just a palette swap of the last level, and so what was the point? This had to be one of the laziest ports ever, until you discover there is an American exclusive release of Afterburner on a Commodore 64, and this is it. First impressions are that this might actually be better than the Euro version. The intro tune is more faithful to the arcade, but that's about it really. If anything, this is even worse than the Euro version of Afterburner. I mean, just look at this mess. And then listen to it. It sounds like Beachhead. And that game came out in 1982. Oh, this is awful. Let's just move on before I vomit. Afterburner being a bad game to play, why did I play it on a Master System? Well, to start, I didn't own this game thankfully, a mate of mine did. But I was curious to see how it might fare on a console. Especially as this game was a whopping 4MB cartridge, one of the largest Master System games to ever appear at the time. Visually, it's not too bad. The F-14 looks okay, the explosions look okay as well, the enemy aircraft look decent enough, and they even managed to keep the barrel roll in. Sonically, this game is not too good. The soundtrack is pretty faithful to the arcade, but not as good quality wise. But the sound of the guns and the explosions are weak, and do let the game down. Gameplay wise, it still suffers the same problem as the arcade version. The gameplay just isn't there really. Overall, it's a pretty good port of an average game. With the Mega Drive having a sterling reputation for reproducing arcade ports at home, I had slightly higher hopes for this game on Sega's 16-bit machine. And visually, I would have to say, it's not much better than the Master System. In places there are some improvements with the smoke trails and things like that, and the speed of the game is improved, but it's still a lot slower than the arcade counterpart. The sound is actually a little flat in my opinion. The speech is nice and clear, but seems to be spoken without the urgency, and the soundtrack seems quite a bit slower. And this does not help with the frantic pace of the gameplay. But then, the gameplay is not there either. It's difficult to know what to expect. If you take an arcade game that only has good sounding graphics and zero gameplay, then it should come as no surprise that the game isn't very good. Sega wanted Afterburner to be this global blockbuster, and depending on what metric you use, you could say it was, but you could also say that it wasn't. To me, it was Sega showing the world that they were the masters of the sprite scaling games, and Afterburner was a vanity exercise for them. But for us gamers, us pure gamers that is, it was nothing more than a bang average game that had a good atmosphere but failed to provide anything other than that. I would recommend anyone giving this a go in the arcades if you ever see it, as you need to experience the atmosphere to believe it. But for the home, I would say if you haven't played it already, then you're not missing out on much at all. If you like this video, then please give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below. And to all of those who have subscribed already, thank you, it really does mean a lot. And that's all from me folks, thanks for watching.